Virtue is your power. Justice is your path. It sounds idealistic, doesn't it? But stop for a second and ask yourself, how much of your life is guided by what's truly right? How often do you choose integrity over convenience or justice over self-interest? Here's a truth that might sting. Most people drift through life, letting fear, greed, or ambition dictate their choices. They sacrifice their values for short-term gains, only to realize later how hollow it feels. But what if the real power, the kind that brings fulfillment and respect, comes not from wealth, status, or control, but from living a life of virtue and justice? It's counterintuitive in today's world of quick wins and endless competition. But Cicero, one of Rome's greatest minds, believed it was the ultimate truth. To him, virtue wasn't just an abstract ideal, it was the key to a meaningful life. And justice, it wasn't just a rule to follow, it was the path to personal and societal harmony. In the next few moments, we'll dive into Cicero's profound teachings, exploring how they can help you rise above distractions, face life's storms with resilience, and build a legacy rooted in purpose and strength. If you're ready to unlock your inner power and walk the path of justice, subscribe now and join me as we uncover Cicero's timeless roadmap to greatness. Let's begin. Lesson 1. Reason as the guiding force. Let me ask you something. What is the one thing in life that no one can take away from you? Your wealth? No. Your health? Sadly, no. Your reputation? Not even that. Cicero believed the answer was simple yet profound. Virtue. For him, virtue wasn't just a noble ideal. It was the ultimate treasure, the very foundation of a meaningful life. But what does it mean to make virtue your highest goal? Imagine for a moment a life where every decision you make aligns with your deepest moral values. No guilt, no regrets, just clarity. Cicero argued that true happiness stems not from external pleasures or possessions, but from living with integrity. Sounds idealistic? Maybe. But think about this. How often do we chase after things, money, status, approval, only to feel empty once we get them? What if the problem isn't what we're chasing, but why we're chasing it? Cicero's perspective forces us to rethink our priorities. He didn't dismiss wealth, power, or pleasure. He simply pointed out their limitations. These things, he said, are fleeting, fragile, and entirely out of our control. Virtue, on the other hand, it's unshakable. It doesn't depend on luck or circumstances. It's a choice we make every single day. Now, let's complicate things. If virtue is so powerful, why is it so hard to live virtuously? Why do we so often trade integrity for convenience, honesty for advantage, or kindness for self-interest? Cicero knew the struggle. He lived in a turbulent political era, surrounded by corruption and betrayal. Yet he held firm to his belief: virtue is the only thing that truly defines us. And here's where the magic of Cicero's philosophy comes alive. He challenges us to redefine what success looks like. Is it about accumulating things, or is it about becoming someone worth admiring? Pause for a second and ask yourself, are the choices you're making today building a life you'll be proud of tomorrow? As we explore Cicero's wisdom further, let's unravel how this unwavering commitment to virtue influenced not only his personal life, but also his vision for a just society. Because, as you'll see, for Cicero, virtue wasn't just personal, it was the heartbeat of civilization itself. But more on that in a moment. Lesson 2. Mastery over emotions. Have you ever made a decision in the heat of the moment, only to regret it later? Maybe it was a harsh word spoken in anger, a rushed choice made out of fear, or an opportunity missed because doubt held you back. Cicero would say that these moments, when emotions overtake reason, are exactly what we need to guard against. For him, reason wasn't just a tool, it was the compass for living a life of purpose. But here's the tricky part. How often do we let our emotions steer the wheel instead of our logic? Cicero understood that humans are emotional creatures, often swayed by desires, fears, and impulses. He didn't dismiss emotions altogether. Instead, he believed they needed to be guided by reason, much like a wild horse needs a skilled rider. Without reason, he warned, we risk galloping blindly into chaos. Picture this: a Roman senator standing in the Senate, faced with a heated debate. The room buzzes with tension, voices raised, tempers flaring. Cicero stands tall, calm amidst the storm, carefully weighing his words. This wasn't just politics for him. It was a way of life. Reason, he believed, was what separated the wise from the reckless, the just from the corrupt. But let's bring this back to you. How do you make decisions? Are you the kind of person who takes a step back, weighs the pros and cons, and listens to your inner voice? Or do you let the noise around you, the expectations, the pressures, make the choice for you? Cicero would urge you to pause and ask yourself, what does my reason tell me is right? Not what's easy, not what's popular, but what's right. And yet, reason isn't always comfortable, is it? It can tell us hard truths, force us to face things we'd rather ignore, or nudge us to take the path of discipline instead of ease. Cicero knew this too. He wasn't asking us to deny our humanity, our emotions, our passions, but to elevate it, to let reason transform raw feelings into something greater, wisdom. Now, here's a question to linger on as we move forward. If you were to truly let reason guide your life, what would you do differently today? Because for Cicero, reason wasn't just about making better choices. It was about creating a better world. And that's a journey worth exploring further. Lesson 3. Prioritizing virtue. What makes something truly right? Is it the laws of your country, the traditions of your culture, or is there something deeper, something that transcends borders, power, and time? Cicero believed there was. He called it natural law, a universal standard of justice that exists whether we acknowledge it or not. And here's the fascinating part. He thought this law wasn't invented by humans, but discovered like a hidden truth waiting to be uncovered. But here's the catch. How often do we see justice twisted by personal agendas or corrupted by greed? Cicero lived in a Rome rife with political scandals, betrayals, and power plays. And yet, he stood firm in his belief. Justice isn't negotiable. It's not a tool to serve the powerful. It's a principle that governs all of us equally. Imagine the courage it takes to say that in a room full of senators plotting their next move. Now think about our world today. How many times have you seen people justify wrongs with technicalities or loopholes? Cicero's voice echoes through centuries, urging us to ask a vital question. Is it just because it's legal, or is it legal because it's just? For Cicero, justice wasn't just an abstract idea. It was the glue that held society together. He argued that without justice, laws are empty words and power becomes tyranny. It wasn't enough to follow the rules. Those rules had to align with something higher. And here's where it gets personal. If you had to stand before an audience, your family, your friends, your community, and defend your actions, would you feel confident saying, I chose what was right, not what was easy? Cicero challenges us to hold ourselves to that standard, not just when it's convenient, but when it's hardest. The moments when doing the right thing costs us something. The moments when silence would be safer. It's in those moments that justice, true justice, reveals who we really are. And if you're wondering how one man's ancient philosophy could possibly matter today, ask yourself this. What kind of world would we live in if everyone made decisions based not on profit, fear, or popularity, but on justice? Cicero would say it's not just a question worth asking, it's a question worth living. Lesson 4. Duty and responsibility. What drives your decisions? Is it ambition, survival, or maybe the promise of something greater? For Cicero, the answer was crystal clear: duty. But not just any duty, a duty tied to morality, to doing what's right even when it's inconvenient or uncomfortable. Now here's the twist. Have you ever considered how much of your life is shaped by what you owe? To others, to yourself, to the world? Cicero believed that a life of purpose is built on fulfilling these obligations, not as a burden, but as a calling. Picture a Roman senator standing in the grand hall of the Senate, voices rising around him in debate. The air is heavy with tension, yet he speaks with conviction, not to please the crowd, but to uphold what he knows is just. That's the kind of courage Cicero thought duty required, acting not for applause, but for principle. But let's pause for a moment. How often do we shy away from our duties because they seem too hard, too risky? How often do we choose the easier path, convincing ourselves that someone else will step up? Cicero would argue that it's precisely in those moments, when duty feels like a mountain, that we discover our true character. And here's where it gets personal. What does duty mean to you? Maybe it's showing up for a friend in need, even when your schedule is packed. Maybe it's speaking out against something you know is wrong, even if your voice shakes. For Cicero, these small acts of moral courage weren't just personal victories. They were the building blocks of a just society. Now, let's complicate the story. Duty isn't always clear, is it? What happens when obligations collide? When loyalty to a friend conflicts with loyalty to the truth? Cicero faced these dilemmas too, navigating the murky waters of Roman politics where every choice carried a cost. Yet he held to one guiding principle. If you act with integrity, if you let morality steer your actions, you can stand tall, no matter the outcome. So, here's the question Cicero leaves us with. When the moment comes, and it will you answer the call of duty? Because in his eyes, to live without fulfilling our moral obligations is not to live at all. It's a challenge, yes, but it's also an invitation to rise to something greater. Lesson 5. Resilience and emotional control. Have you ever felt anger burn through you, leaving you saying or doing something you regretted? Or let fear paralyze you in a moment when you needed courage most? Cicero understood these struggles. He lived in a world filled with chaos, betrayal, political power plays, and the constant threat of exile or even death. Yet he believed there was a way to rise above it all, mastering your emotions. But here's the real question. How often do you let your emotions dictate your actions? Cicero argued that emotions aren't the enemy. They're part of being human. The challenge lies in taming them, much like training a wild animal. Unchecked, anger, fear, or envy can run rampant, controlling your decisions. But with reason and resilience, Cicero believed we could harness those emotions and channel them into strength. Picture this. Cicero, standing on the Senate floor, his opponents shouting accusations and threats. The tension is thick, but his face remains calm, his voice steady. It wasn't that Cicero didn't feel fear or frustration. He did, but he refused to let those feelings control him. Instead, he leaned on his reason, his sense of justice, and his unshakable belief in doing what was right. Now, let's bring it back to you. What would it look like to face your own storms with that kind of composure? Imagine walking into a high-pressure situation, a job interview, a difficult conversation, a moment of crisis, and keeping your cool. Not because you don't feel the weight of the moment, but because you've trained yourself to stay grounded. Cicero challenges us to see emotions for what they really are, signals, not masters. Anger can alert us to injustice, but it can't solve it. Fear can keep us cautious, but it can't protect us from everything. Resilience, Cicero believed, was about acknowledging these emotions and then choosing to act, not react. So here's a thought. The next time emotions threaten to take over, ask yourself, am I in control, or are they? Cicero would remind us that true strength isn't in suppressing what we feel, but in directing it toward what really matters. And maybe, just maybe, that's the kind of mastery that turns ordinary moments into extraordinary victories. Lesson 6. Politics and ethics. What if I told you that thinking about death could actually make your life richer? Seems strange, doesn't it? But Cicero believed this deeply. For him, philosophy wasn't just an abstract exercise. It was a preparation for the ultimate certainty, death. And here's the twist. He didn't see this as morbid or depressing. Instead, He saw it as the key to truly living. But let me ask you, how often do you think about your own mortality? For most of us, it's a topic we avoid. It feels heavy, uncomfortable, even frightening. Cicero understood that fear. He lived in turbulent times, surrounded by political betrayal and uncertainty. Yet, instead of running from the reality of death, he leaned into it. Why? Because he believed that by confronting our mortality, we free ourselves from the fear that holds us back. Imagine Cicero sitting in his study, scrolls of wisdom spread before him, as the faint flicker of an oil lamp illuminates his face. In that quiet space, he asks himself the same question he challenges us to ask. If my time is limited, what truly matters? Suddenly, the noise of ambition, trivial arguments, and fleeting pleasures fades away, leaving only the things that give life meaning. But here's the paradox Cicero offers us. How can you live fully if you're constantly afraid of the end? He believed the answer lay in embracing death as a natural part of existence, as inevitable as the setting sun. To him, this wasn't about giving up, it was about letting go. Letting go of fear, of attachment to things that don't last, of distractions that pull us away from our purpose. Now, let's turn the lens back to you. What would your life look like if you stopped fearing the end and started focusing on the journey? How might your choices change if every moment carried the weight of being precious, fleeting, and irreplaceable? Cicero's wisdom urges us to live with intention, to fill our days with actions and thoughts we'd be proud of if tomorrow never came. So, what's stopping you? Cicero would say that the person who accepts death isn't morbid, they're wise. Because to live without fear of the end is to live without limits. And maybe, just maybe, that's the secret to a life worth remembering. Lesson 7. Friendship and Community. What would you do if you had power? Would you use it to serve others or to serve yourself? Cicero, a man who walked the corridors of Roman politics, believed that power was more than just a privilege. It was a moral responsibility. But here's the hard truth. How often do we see leaders wield power for personal gain rather than the greater good? Cicero's wisdom cuts through the noise, challenging us to rethink what it means to lead with integrity. Let's set the stage. Imagine a bustling Roman Senate, voices raised in heated debate. Cicero stands in the center, dressed in a toga, his voice calm but commanding. He speaks not for applause or alliances, but for the truth. For him, politics wasn't a game of strategy, it was an extension of morality. What is right? That was the only question that mattered. But let's bring it closer to home. How often do we make compromises in our own lives? Maybe it's a small lie to avoid conflict or going along with something we know isn't right because it's easier. Cicero would argue that these small choices ripple out into the world, shaping not just our character, but the society we live in. If leaders don't lead with ethics, how can they inspire others to follow? And here's where it gets tricky. What happens when doing the right thing comes at a cost? Cicero knew this dilemma all too well. He was exiled for speaking against corruption and opposing tyranny, but he stood firm in his belief. Integrity is non-negotiable. Imagine the courage it takes to stand for truth when the price is your career, your reputation, or even your life. So here's the question Cicero forces us to ask ourselves. If given the choice between what's right and what's easy, which would you choose? And what kind of society could we build if we all held ourselves and our leaders to that standard? Cicero's voice echoes through the centuries, urging us to remember that true power lies not in control, but in service to others. And maybe that's the lesson we need most today, that ethics and leadership aren't just ideals for politicians, they're responsibilities for all of us. Because in the end, the strength of a society isn't measured by its wealth or its armies, but by the moral compass of its people. So, how strong is yours? Lesson 8. Legacy and Justice. What would life be without friendship? Think about it. Who do you turn to when life feels overwhelming? who celebrates your victories and lifts you up when you fall. Cicero believed that friendship wasn't just a luxury. It was essential to a life well lived. But here's the real question. What makes a friendship truly meaningful? Is it shared laughter, loyalty, or something deeper? For Cicero, friendship was built on one foundation: virtue. He saw it not as a transaction where we give to get, but as a bond rooted in mutual respect and shared values. Now, pause for a moment. How many of your friendships feel like that? How many are built on substance? And how many feel more like convenience? Cicero's wisdom pushes us to think beyond surface-level connections, challenging us to seek friendships that enrich our souls, not just our schedules. Picture two friends walking together in a bustling Roman forum, their conversation earnest and thoughtful. Cicero believed that true friends challenge us to be better, holding us accountable when we falter and cheering us on when we strive for greatness. But here's the hard truth. How often do we settle for less? How often do we surround ourselves with people who drain rather than uplift us? And then there's this. Friendship isn't just about what we receive. It's about what we give. Cicero argued that in a true friendship, there's no keeping score. You give your loyalty, your time, your trust, not because you expect something in return, but because that's what friendship demands. Think about your closest relationships. Are you giving as much as you're getting? Would your friends say you inspire them the way they inspire you? But here's the twist. Cicero wasn't just talking about personal friendships. He believed the principles of friendship could strengthen entire communities. Imagine a world where we treat our neighbors, our colleagues, even strangers, with the same respect and care we show our closest friends. What kind of world would that create? So let me leave you with this. Who are the friends shaping your life? And just as importantly, how are you shaping theirs? Cicero believed that through friendship, we discover not just the best in others, but the best in ourselves. And maybe, just maybe, that's the kind of connection we're all searching for. So, now that you've explored Cicero's timeless teachings, let me ask you this. Are you ready to take control of your life? Are you willing to align your actions with virtue, prioritize justice, and truly master yourself? It's one thing to listen and nod along, but what will you do with this knowledge? Will you let it slip away with the next distraction, or will you make a change today? Think about the decisions you make every day. Are they leading you closer to the person you want to become, or are they keeping you stuck in a cycle of frustration and regret? Cicero believed that virtue and justice weren't just ideals. They were tools to transform your life. So, what's stopping you from using them? If you're ready to rise above the chaos and start building a life of purpose, I invite you to subscribe to this channel and hit the notification bell. Here, we dive deep into the wisdom of history's greatest minds, giving you the tools to lead a life of integrity and strength. Don't miss the journey. And if you want to go even deeper, I've got something special for you. Cicero's De Officiis is a masterpiece that lays out the roadmap for living a virtuous and fulfilling life. You can get it for an incredibly low price on Amazon. Check the first comment below for the link and start applying Cicero's wisdom to your life today. Your journey to mastery begins now. What are you waiting for?